Good morning. We want to welcome you to the Branson Legacy Sabbath School class. Again, David and Bronwyn are on holiday. I'm not sure where. They said that we didn't know. They could be in Hawaii or they could be in Loma. So I don't really know, but they're having a good time. And so we're glad you could make it today. Next Sabbath here in the morning, Paul Herman will be speaking to us on Chapter 9 of our book, Facing Doubt. Okay, we have a special speaker with us today, Rodney Corker. Rodney, you come about a year ago? Started about a year ago?
4 months.
No, you've been here longer than
4 or 5, maybe 5 months. Maybe 6
Seems
months.
like it's been forever.
It was March. It was the month of March that I walked through that door.
Okay, well, great. How did you find us, by the way?
Contacted a friend who was a member of Lee Abley,
Okay.
fellow Australian. I said, I'm looking for a class of where there is discussion. I need to listen to my brothers here in the church and try and understand where is Seventh-day Adventist thinking today. And so you are my teachers. This class is my teachers. I'm the student here. I'm listening and I'm taking notes. I never come in without a book. You notice I'm taking notes here because I'm the student.
Okay, now we can tell from your accent that you're from someplace other than America. It's Australia, I think, but what part of Australia are you from?
I'm from the West Coast, but I lived in London and New York and San Bernardino. So
Okay.
that's my accent.
Okay, so it's with Perth, and where did you get your undergraduate education?
Undergraduate education was in Western Australia, Perth, Western Australia. Graduate education was NYU, Institute of Rehabilitation Medicine, Loma, and UCLA.
You're married,
Yes,
and you live where?
in Laverne,
Okay, and your wife's name is
Joanne.
Joanne, and you have children?
No children.
No children, okay. And you came to America in what year?
Came to America the first time in 1973, and then I came again in 1980, 81 when I came to Loma, and then I came here full-time from 1986, became a dual citizen in 2003.
Okay.
I actually helped write the act for dual citizenship, so I'm pretty proud of that.
And you have a DPH from UCLA?
Yes.
Oh, and I have
Enough
to,
about me.
well, there's one other thing, and he told me to pick out of his curriculum vitae. One thing that stuck out in my mind was sheep shearer. Now, I have to say, as my grandfather, whenever we would go to the county fair, the first place we would go is to the sheep barns, and he'd watch them shear sheep because early on, he didn't have the electric clippers either. He used the old hand clippers, so...
It was sheep shearing that drove me back to education and school. I sweated from 7:30 in the morning to 5:30 at night, and I thought, there has to be a better way. I have to go back to school.
Anyway, you're going to talk about your journey today and how you came back to the Adventist, to this group here. And so I'm going to have a word of prayer, and then I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you.
Father, thank you for this opportunity that we can be here, be with Rodney in a very special way. We want to listen to his journey. We pray in your name. Amen.
That's a good idea, but I do talk fast and I talk loud, so you hear me?
Yes.
You hear me okay? Okay. I told Forrest that I could talk into next week on this material, so he's going to stop me and then we can have a good discussion time, but stop me earlier rather than later. A couple of disclaimers at the front, which I kind of normally hate to do, is I'm not a theologian. I'm not sitting in front of you as a theologian. I'm not sitting in front of you as a teacher. I've done a lot of teaching, but that's not why I'm here. I'm on a journey, a very personal journey. And it might make me sound eccentric. I admit to being eccentric. To some of you, it might even sound bizarre. And that's okay by me too. Because in the end, I do believe that belief in God and your spiritual journey is deeply personal. It's personal. And Dr. Branson here said, and he's been in the church here forever. You know how old he is. And he summarized very beautifully my position last week when he said, I bring it all down to thou and I. Thou and I. And that's really where I've been the last 35 years. I never gave up on God. I just couldn't figure my way through all the doctrinal stuff, and it didn't really seem to matter. And it didn't seem to matter to most of the Adventists that I work with and the people that I was around. And so it was easy to kind of push it to the side. but I never gave up my belief on God. Part of the reason why I'm back here is I had this devout belief in God on a thou and me basis. And I felt I had this relationship with God. I've always felt God knew who I was. And 3 times in my life, I left everything that was familiar, everything that I knew, and headed off in search of a mission that I felt that God had for me. I don't know how many of you people have done that, but have you ever left everyone and everything that you knew, everything familiar, in search of the sense that God had a mission and a purpose for you? But that's what was driving inside me. There's something in me, whether it's a God gene, some kind of divine material, which I do believe in creation now, and so there's something in us that gives us this will to worship and this will to understand God. And that's what we're going to talk about this morning, is more about understanding God. So I'm a trained researcher. I spent 3 years in researching cancer research at UCLA. But I've been in healthcare most of my life, and so I understand the diagnostic intervention process, the therapeutic process, and gathering information. I've applied that in my work in all my life. I apply it to investing. I'm going to apply it, and I do apply it here, to religion. Is you gather the information, you sort through the information, you array the information, you evaluate the material that you've got. You design a plan of action, you implement the plan of action, you monitor the plan of action, and then what you do is make some midstream adjustments as you have to, and then you keep monitoring, and it becomes a cycle. Every doctor knows this, every professional researcher knows this, that this process holds up on many things. And so I actually use it in my investing. That's how I invest. I write it all out, map it out. Every month I read it back to myself. Am I on track with my investments? I'm doing the same thing here with religion. It's how I deal with doubt. You've got to go back to the very beginnings and get your information and work yourself through in a disciplined process. And that's what I'm doing here. And so just briefly I want to give you a metaphor. It's the Corker metaphor. But this is where I found myself in my late 60s, where I never expected to be. I'm still in the Judeo-Christian waters. I'm in a river, and I'm just swimming along. I don't really know where that river's going to go. It might go down to a lake. It might go to the ocean. I'll deal with that when it gets there. But I'm pretty comfortable in this Judeo-Christian waters. And so here I go. I'm swimming along. I see someone I know. G'day. How are you? Doing all right over there? And here we go. I get into my late 60s. I'm looking around, and there's less and less people in the water that I know. I'm thinking, I'm looking back, where are the people that I grew up with? Where are the people I know? Then they're out of the water. I look at the shore, and there's people sitting on the shore, got their feet in the water paddling, up to their knees in the water, and they're just watching others go by. I recognize some of these people. They're sitting on the bank, just watching this river go by. And I thought, that was a challenge to me. I didn't see that coming. I wonder why. I realized after some provocations that I need to either get back in the water and swim upstream to the headwaters and start again, or else maybe go up some tributaries, get ripped up on some rocks. But to be intellectually honest, I couldn't do what I was doing. And I was provoked by some dear friends here that got me activated. I'm not going to go through those, but if you've got your document in front of you, you can see what stimulated me, and I've got 7 or 8 there. You can read those out, but I think some of them are going to be familiar to you. But the real provocation to me came from 2 of my very best friends. One of them said, Rodney, you're highly educated, but with all the knowledge that you've got, there's only one intellectually honest position that you can take, that we can take as scientists, as researchers, as hospital administrators, and that is the agnostic. You've got to take up a position of you can't prove God, you can't disprove God. It's a Mexican standoff, or any kind of standoff that you want. So take up the honest position, and that is of the agnostic. The other rider on the agnostic is you're indifferent to the outcome. You don't care one way or the other. You see, that's the true agnostic. That's the agnostic that frightens me and challenges me, because it ends up in nihilism, meaninglessness, and it's like I'm not interested in meaninglessness. So this gnawed at me for years, that I have to go back and do some work in terms of my research model. The second one was another dear friend who just recently said to me and declared that he no longer believes in God. And he set me back on my haunches, and because I didn't expect it coming. And I'm talking to the people that I'm talking about and listed here are ministers, former SDA ministers and ministers' sons and children. So I'm talking about within the family, as it were. And so what he said was, look, if there was a God, why didn't he just pick up the phone and call somebody? With all the technology today, call somebody, anyone. Say, I'm going to be late. I've been held up for a while. I know you're expecting me to do some things, but I can't get to it right now. I got other stuff. Get anything but something. And the other thing was, if all this doctrine is so important, Dennis, why didn't he write something down himself? Why didn't Jesus write something himself? Why did they leave it for other people to write a long time later? You see, that's part of the challenge. I didn't have a cogent, quick answer for them. I thought, that's not good enough. I need to have, and we all need to have answers for this large back door, which many of our brothers and sisters are going out. And we, you know, I've heard people say, well, they'd only read this book by Ellen White or some other Adventist or whatever, or it would be okay. They would get it right. But I've interviewed many people that have left the church, many of them my family and my relatives, and asked them, why have they left the church? And there's a number of answers. I haven't got time to go into it today, but there are answers that you would have, that most of you would have heard of before. It was kind of, they kind of just drifted out of it. Answers like, well, religion is for children. It's not for adults. What do you mean it's for children? Well, you know, we're all talking about the Bible stories, Uncle Arthur's Bible stories, that kind of stuff. And I find that a lot of my friends never got past that understanding of Christianity. And so in reading the material that I'm looking at, trying to understand who were the gods and what was common in the gods, and I made a list of these, part of my documentation. But there's several things that are just key to Judaism, key to Christianity, and also central in Islam. But I kind of think I'm getting off the track here a little. But the point is, there are these common, very adult themes, and underneath them, there's always this quotient of three things that I can recall. Would be, there's ideation, imagination, fantasy. There's a component of logic and realism, but it has to mature into experiential. That's the key. You have to experience God. If you don't mature into experiencing God, and you're stuck back somewhere else, you can leave the church anytime you want. If it's just a cradle of doctrines, a cognitive cradle of doctrines that you understand, that you sit on your head, you know, and keep on your head for a while, you can lay that cradle off any time that you want if you don't experience God. I have not interviewed one former Seventh-day Adventist that ever had the notion they could have an experience with God. It was all around doctrine and discipline and it just being too tough and a bunch of hypocrites. You know, their conversation all goes one way. There was no maturation in this whole thing. So, I'm going to keep moving. I'm not going to talk about any of the rest, but you can see how I was made to feel that, somewhat disingenuous with my academic background and being a believer in God. My friends just couldn't see it. Anyway, so, the final one being, yes, another dear friend who used to love provoking me was, if I can't tick all the boxes on the baptismal vows, I couldn't even find mine. I wouldn't even know where to start looking for, frankly. But if I couldn't tick all the boxes, the only genuine thing to do was to go and take my name off the roll. It was all or none religion, you see, all or none Adventism. And that was the proposition. And I had a way to talk my way around it and that kind of stuff, but I never convinced this concerned brethren, relative of mine, that I should deign to come into the halls of an Adventist organization. So my goals here were to start with, when did us become us? When did civilization begin? Now, I wasn't that interested in primates and our stuff before that, but I really was interested, when did us become us? Thinking, thoughtful, self-reliant, self-determining humans. That was like a starting point. I had to find a starting point. I had to understand the history of gods and what the core message of God or gods were. What was it they said themselves? Without all the interjection of Christians and Islam and the Hebrew people and others, what is it that is the best evidence left on earth, either written or in some kind of archaeological form, that we can say, yeah, that's a message from God. So I wanted to go strip it back and go to the very beginnings. I definitely needed more plausible stories than the infantile stories often served up to me as a young person in Sabbath school. And that's for another time. But I can go through those another time. I had this kind of mushy faith, which many of my Adventist friends have, which is, has no degree of certainty about it. The most anxious people that I know are my Seventh-day Adventist relatives. They're hand-wringing hope Adventists, apprehensive, fearful. That should not be a part of Christianity. That should not be part of Adventism. What is it that people are picking up that makes them more fearful and hand-wringing? And they talk about this blessed hope. I'd sooner talk about a blessed certainty, or something that has more, a stronger base to it. So I'm not putting hope down. Hope is very important, but you can't just stop at hope and not explore some greater degree of certainty, not explore more realism and logic. And so, yeah, this anxiety-laden hope in my family has been like almost like a disease, I think. I consider it a pathology, a spiritual pathology. I have to reassess, is anyone coming back? All civilizations that were visited by the so-called God, or gods who talk of gods, these gods all came from elsewhere, and they all went to elsewhere. They were here for some time, for a short time. But one thing that they all said was, they're coming back. I have yet to read about an early civilization that wasn't visited by God that said they were coming back. Well, who's coming back, and when, and under what circumstances are they coming back? I need to rebuild that. But underneath all this, what I needed was a straw man position to siphon everything through. And I felt that I could do that. That's why I documented everything. I firmly believe you do not have a set of beliefs if you don't write them down and read them back every month. If you're not doing that, you're just pushing information around. You think you've got a set of beliefs until someone challenges you and you don't have a really good answer for them. And so I've been kind of dogmatic about pushing that down. But I want to build a straw man position. As people talk to me about anything, I'll put it up against that frame of reference. I actually have it pretty much in place, except for some of the stakes in the ground on Adventism and Christianity. I'm up to 2000 BC, so this is all before Christianity. I've got yet to do that, you see, in my journey. I'm not there yet. But if I'm going to rejoin the Adventist church, I've got to put some stakes in the ground. And I'm learning some stakes. The fact is, I have 6 stakes in the ground already, which I didn't expect to have, that I think I would die on those stakes. I have put myself on a moratorium for reading anything Christian and certainly anything Adventist until this project is done. So the only Adventism that I allow myself is coming in and listening to you folk. And as much as possible try to suspend my belief in God, because I've got to mitigate bias. So what I've come down and take that inside-out perspective. So I've read from multiple sources. I have tried to mitigate bias as much as I can. I'm looking at original sources. I'm using a very long chronology. I started with a null hypothesis, as I said. The interesting thing is that there's a rule trap, and I think any researcher knows this. When someone comes and presents to you and they've got a single source of reference, you know that there's going to be a lot of bias in it. You know, it's anti-research. If someone comes in and uses a very short time frame on their references, and I'll throw this out to be provocative, I would give a fail to those people. But if someone used the King James Version, a 400-year-old Bible, and the Old Testament, which is a library books from the Hebrew people, and did an assignment for me, just limited to those there, if I was an academic, I would fail them. I'd fail them. There's no recency, there's no in-between, there's no breadth of reading, there's no outside-in perspective. This is just turning on the inside. And so I've been trying to impose some harsh conditions and stringent research conditions on the way that I'm approaching things. To move along here, the scope of my investigation was, I looked at evolution, intelligent design, whatever that was, I didn't know what it was, and then creation, and then looked at monotheism, polytheism, and agnosticism in all religions. And then I put down my own statement of belief, which I got about 50, and I'll keep pruning that. Now, quickly on to evolution, just some very, very quick summary findings here. Evolution was a dismay to me. I couldn't believe how weak the science was as a scientist, looking at the research design on this here. It's a secular religion. It's unworthy of being taught in a science class. I got very strong feelings about it. And I gave up after about 3 months of reading widely on this and thought, okay, I'm not going to spend any more time on creation until they ask some key questions. So I wrote out all the questions that an evolutionist needs to answer before I'll even engage that field of study. Because nothing is reproducible, nothing is observable, nothing is measurable. There's no plethora of sample material to look at. Where are all the in-between, human development creatures that were morphing from one to another? They're just not there. Everything is kind of there in its species. And when a researcher finds a bone from somewhere, or that might be human, you read about that. They're ecstatic because they found a finger, or maybe a skeleton or half a skeleton. They find out later that was a pig or something else. You don't see the retraction. I'm not saying that they're not there. They should be there in the thousands, like dinosaurs. They're just not there. That's just one point. I could go on for an hour just on this topic. I'm going to move on. So, yes, I document my findings. And so, yes, this is evolution. It just does not fit into a science, and blah, 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 blah. And it ends up in nihilism too. I mean, most of the real evolutionists that I've read in time, half a dozen of them, Niski and others, what did they end up doing in their final years? They were isolated, talking to their poodle or their pet. It goes nowhere. So it's an awful choice. So the other thing that I did beside that, I put a list of miracles down. What are the physical evidence on Earth that involve the Earth and the planetary system that evolution can't explain and never will explain? And then I started to get interested in religion again. But putting those side by side was a very powerful thing to do. And I've got a list of all the unexplainable things that need to be addressed. You can't look away. It is disingenuous to look away at real evidence and consider yourself intellectually honest. I can no longer step away, and I don't think my friends should step away from it. And so, and certainly with evolution, with Christianity, we've got some hard questions to answer, and we beat those in Sabbath school, some of them, and we probably don't spend a thorough enough time on them. But within evolution, everything has to be explained. Everything requires a quantum leap of faith. You've got all this randomness and conditions and preconditions, and when you start looking at those and caveats on it, it's like, I think I'm done with it. And spontaneous events, that where the inanimate became the animate. It's never been seen, never been measured. And so I'm not going to buy it until you can do it. As I said to one of my friends, I said, well, all these elements found themselves, they came together over time, and they keep adding billions of years. Anything that's a puzzle, let's throw in another couple of million years. No, let's throw in a billion years. So even since 93 or something like that there, when it was 6.5 million years, it's now 14.7 billion years. Just down on the scorecard. See, these are really poor responses in a scientific world. I'm getting sidetracked, so I'm going to get back on this. Intelligent design and creation. Went to Barnes & Noble, said, where's your section on intelligent design? Didn't know what I was talking about, didn't have one. So, okay, I need to find it elsewhere. Went to the internet, talked to some friends, and I got some materials on bibliarchaeology, watched some stuff on the History Channel, Nat Geo, ancient origins, that kind of stuff, to get myself started. And I've got a couple of materials here, but there's some key authors that I looked at. But everything begins with the Sumer. I'd never heard of the Sumer, or even the Akkadians as an Adventist. But these were the people that were down on the lower Euphrates, the bottom end of the Euphrates, that came out of the Garden of Eden. Oh, I'd heard about the Garden of Eden, And so, what was the beginning? Where did the Hebrew people get their language from? And where did they learn to count? And who were the counters, the original counters? Where did the language came from? The first empire was Akkadian, the Akkadian Empire. But the Sumer, somewhat mythical, mysterious people, were the first. And just about everything that I know, we know, and use here today started with the Sumer, whether it's vegetables, whether it's fruit, whether it's science, whether it's pharmacy, whether it's medicine, whether it's making beer or wine. They were the first. And there's over 100 firsts that come out of the Sumer. I made a list of 50 of them myself, and I'll keep adding to that. And then I've overlaid that list with biblical references and Semitic references. So I'm trying to read as much as the Semitic language as I can, including the Egyptian. I don't read that, so I have to read commentaries, but I try and read a lot of commentaries, so cover myself, I don't get stuck on one commentator that I like. And because we know that the Hebrew got their language from the Western Semites. Well, who were the Western Semites? And where did they get their language from? That's my journey. I've got to go back and find out where did they get their language from? And what was that original language? What was the mother tongue of the Semites? That was the Akkadian. Well, who were the Akkadian? What were they about? Blah, 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 blah. It goes back. And somewhere here, the other realization was that there were multiple gods. And I use little g because I don't know if they're big G. It's only the guy who convinces me that I should worship him I'm going to give the big G to. All the rest are little g's until they can convince me they're a big G. But for example, the first commandment always bothered me as a kid. I asked my Sabbath school, I asked my parents, first commandment God gives us, have no other gods before me. Well, who are these gods? Who are these gods? The answer back from my Adventist Sabbath school teachers was, well, there was a golden calf. They built a golden calf. They worshipped a golden calf. And I think, I got that one licked. Hey, no way I'm going to go out and build a golden calf. Why would I want to do that? And then they would say, hey, could be your car. And I think, well, I attach to humans, to flesh and bone. I don't attach to Juco and paint and metal. I got that one beat too. I ain't going to be worshipping no car. You see, well, it could be anything of pride. See, our answers were really poor. We had no idea who the competing gods were. When Yahweh came, you know, he said, no other gods before. Who was he talking about? What were those gods on earth? I've done a profile of every one of those gods that I could find, what their characteristics were, what their time frame was, what they stood for, all that, and put that beside who was Yahweh. We as Christians borrow from the Old Testament their God, but who? A short conversation with most Adventists is, who is Yahweh? You know, and that's it's difficult. And then try and reconcile Yahweh to the Creator God, and then to the warm, cuddly Christian God that we have now. Is these are different gods. It's like, has God been morphing on us, or is the record wrong, or are they in fact different gods at different times with different purposes? You know, that's part of the academic journey. And so, and we also have to understand we can't step around the dinosaurs. I've got a cousin who don't want to be confronted with meeting a dinosaur they can't point at and say, that's created by the devil, or that's been crafted by clever technicians. And there's a number of Australians who don't still, of my generation, who don't believe in dinosaurs. They exist at all. But they're, again, people who haven't travelled or been to a museum, but they were told very young this is the work of the devil, and they'll stay with that script. But there were pre-Adamites on earth. There were people whose life was, not would be, 120 years. There's a number of texts in there that have got me kind of concerned and thinking about who these pre-Adamites were and who the Nephilim were. You've got to understand who the Nephilim were, the Anunnaki. You've got to be willing to read this stuff. Others might want to wash their hands from it, like some of the apocryphal material. I'm reading a lot of apocryphal material that sort of rounds out the Bible. I see the Bible as efficacious, but it's shorthand. It's shorthand. If you want to pull the story out, go and read this other stuff and get this outside look in on it. I just throw one interesting, I think is an interesting thing is, in my outside-in look, how many nations you think have a record of the Hebrew God, the Christian God, Yahweh, in their records? Where would you go to find an outside-in look on the Hebrew God, Yahweh? And how many times does it occur? Do you think it's important? Do you think some of the neighboring nations around Israel would say, yeah, we know that guy, don't like him, or yeah, we recognize the name of the God that the Jews worship, the Yehudites, the Jerusalem Jews? One. And it's the Moabites, and it's in stone, where they had a great victory over the Israelites and their God Yahweh. Now, the Bible tells the story the other way around, that it was the Israelites who had the victory. You see, the winner can tell what story they want. But that doesn't bother me that much, because I know at that time, no one wanted to recognize someone else's leader. There was such competition, such jealousy. You didn't talk about somebody else's victory. You didn't talk about somebody else's leader. And then a lot of the records got burned and lost and whatever. But that's another whole trail. But I was surprised to find there's no nation that mentions the God that we borrow from the Jews. One. Okay, so moving along here. There may be others, I'll find them, but I only found one. Ancient civilizations, yes, I profiled ancient civilizations. I've got a few minutes here. I've listed all the physical evidence that I can, monoliths, megaliths, caves that are yet to be explained. None of this fits with evolution's slow grind theory. This represents surges in civilizations and ties in nicely with the Bible, that surge that went on from about the 4th millennium through to about the 2nd millennium in the Euphrates area. No scientist can really understand the rapid turn from seeds to grains and the quality of the foods. And it ties in with a lot of stuff being downloaded from heaven after the flood, when the gods, the people that were involved got around. The God said, hey, we didn't do the right thing by people. We're the ones that failed here. We didn't give them enough support before. Yeah, we've wiped them all out. except the few we saved in a boat. But we need to do a better job with the humans. We're humans. We're invested in them. And so you see this period of rapid expansion. It didn't happen anywhere else in the world at the time. It wasn't going on anywhere else. It was only going on in the lower Euphrates area, Mesopotamia. We have to ask ourselves, why? What is it that Mesopotamia got the rest of the world didn't get? Or what is it the rest of the world had that Mesopotamia didn't have? But if Mesopotamia hadn't did what they did, it got up into the Hebrew people, then came on to Christians, developed this great stream of Judeo-Christianity that's put a man on the moon, you know, and if we didn't backload some stuff out into the mission fields, there'd be lots of nations that would still be throwing spears. So what is it that something happened? Something miraculous happened. And don't tell me it was about trade routes, because trade routes weren't really got going there. But trade routes were important later on. And so, yes, and the other thing that in this section here, this beautiful theophany. Understanding the difference between a theocracy and a theophany, the Jewish people. I figured that if I'm going to understand how Jesus talked to his people, what better than the theophany? From all the way from out of Egypt into southern Canaan. And now I have a different perspective. As an early Adventist, it was a theocracy. This is God telling you, this is my way. If you don't do it my way, I'm going to kill you all. That's basically my summary of college days. Now I see it as a theophany. Here's a God talking to his people and saying, look, I created you. I know what works best for you. If you'd only listen to me, I'm going to take you on this journey, and we're going to talk. And I'm going to give you some guidelines because I know what the outcomes are. I know what will be best for you. You see, that's a whole different approach. And then it's a different attitude that you read the theophany with. But I encourage everybody to get 2 or 3 beautiful Hebrew written theophany stories, some of the most beautiful writing I think I've ever read in my life. And if anyone wants a copy, they can tell me and I'll bring it one of these days. So just kind of moving along here, some findings. Several stakes in the ground, that's for another day. I believe in the primacy and the veracity of the biblical record. But it's basically shorthand. There's nothing better than the Bible. There's nothing even close. There are some complements, but you cannot replace the Bible. There's nothing that competes with it. I have to more fully understand the Hebrew script and some of its origins. I think numbers are very important. I never knew about numbers really when I was a young person, but the repetition of 7, 12, and 60 is really important. The number 7 occurs over 600 times in the Old Testament. 12, I've got 27 times that's listed. This isn't evolution. This is something, an intelligent designer has to be involved in this story, and you have to understand where these stories come from. But the 60, what is called the sexagenal counting system, which came out of Sumer, is very, very important. We use it every day, you know, and you can look at the decimal system. How many numbers go into 10? I think it's 7. And how many numbers go into 60? It's 10. And so 60 minutes, 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 60 multiples of 60, 360 for a circle, the perfect, 180 degrees, 60 degrees isosceles triangle. 60 is there all the time in astrology, geometry, in math, calculus, and in biblical reporting. These were not dumb people, you know. These had either different DNA than we've got, or they were supercharged in some way. These were smart people. Even this year, in the paper twice, they found calculus written by the Babylonians, every bit as sophisticated as modern day calculus. These weren't nomads that were tripping around in the desert. We have to understand who these people were, and where did they get their information. And they got their information from elsewhere, places called heaven. And so that was certainly attention-getting. But just to throw it out there, maybe I shouldn't even do this, but it's a stage of my development. But if you look at 60 and the multiples of 60, and it comes up all the time, what's divisible by 12? Solomon had 720 wives. Who's counting, and what is a wife anyway in those times? But 720 was divisible by 12. And 144,000, that's divisible by 12. Even the number of the beast is 600 plus 60 plus 6. That didn't come from the Hebrew, that came from the Sumerian. That's as old accounting system as exists in the history of the world. And so these variations in use of 66 and 600, how many children came out of Israel? How many? See, we don't know. So these things, it's either two answers, 60,000 or 600,000. But the difference between 60,000 and 600,000 is just the pressure of a reed on a piece of clay. That's the difference. You see, that's how finite. Because we don't necessarily really know. But play it out. Do you think the Pharaoh could not find 60,000 people in the desert, escapees, or were they refugees? Could you hide 600,000 in the desert in Sinai? These are the logical questions that you have to go back and answer. So I know I've got probably no time about that. Just a couple of other things I'll fill up on. I've produced 3 manuscripts comparing the Abrahamic gods, how the gods interpreted, they set their belief systems up. I've looked at the roots of terrorism. I want to know why they want to kill us and where did the idea of killing come from and who do we pray to. I need to better understand when I pray who I'm really praying to. I've got a chronology of the history of the earth according to modern science. Beside that, a chronology of the earth according to the Bible, the chronology of the earth according to the Babylonians. I've got copies there of the Sumeria, of the Epic of Creation, the Sumerian Enuma Elish, which I know that my friend over here knows about, and then a chronology of the civilizations. I've got to know who's on the stage, who are the civilizations and who the players were, and how were they proximal to each other. But I've totally, I think, demystified God. Frankly, I've removed all fear from my religion. I strongly believe in a Godhead because God was not a solo practitioner. There always was a Godhead. There was a Trinity in the beginning. There's a Trinity now that's very important. And I do believe, finish off with, you've got to write it down and read it back to really understand it. And if you're ever going to assimilate beliefs, you can't just look at it. Write it down and ask yourself, do I really believe this? Okay, that's it.
Okay, this is the time for questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, gotta go.
Okay,
Gotta bust the case.
Or would you help me? I see we have one up here.
I just want to clarify something. In the early part of your paper, a few lines down, you said that you drifted into Judeo-Christian waters, but you maintained a strong belief in God. And then a few lines below that, under my quest, you say, I've been on a mission to substantiate God. Do you mean that you're looking for that, what God is like or his character? Is that...
Good question. Probably 2 different ways on that. I had my own personal belief in God from my own experience. I even used to try and bargain with God when I was young. But I would make the point that it's an individual journey, and so I had this strange sense, but mainly from experience, that God knew me. And I don't want to sound self-righteous on that. I don't talk about it much to anybody because you run the risk of being kind of self-righteous. But in terms, I use the expression to substantiate God, I needed to put a rational, logical, outside of Rodney, independent basis on it. What is there in the universe in terms of science, in terms of physical evidence, in terms of forensics, in terms of written record, back in time, that substantiates there was a God here, and that God represents the God that we worship today. That's what I mean by substantiation. It's not just the ideation and Rodney's logic and Rodney's experience. I've got to do better than that, because I'm not really going to convince anybody else just using my own experience, because they can just say, hey, that guy's crazy. They can dismiss me so many different ways.
Curious, are your manuscripts published?
No, but I have thought about it. I've given to a couple of people to read, and actually I've given them to 3 people, and they've all moved from atheism into intelligent design. So my figure is now, my thinking is, it's not my thinking is, okay, I've helped my friends, a couple of my friends, because they now they believe in a God. I find out they always wanted to believe in a God, really. That never went away. It was still in them, eating away at them. They didn't want to die being an atheist, you see. But now, it's like if they can get them there, then my thought would be, it's somebody else's business to tell them about doctrines and theology and that. That's not what I do, you know. I'm substantiating that there is a God. So, no, I haven't published, but I'm thinking about it, and I would love to collaborate with one or two people, because I'm too old and irritable to go back and do a lot of the referencing and proof texting and stuff.
I think there might be two pieces of information you might profit from.
Thank you.
Is that one piece of information is that at La Sierra, there are some archaeologists that understand the Palestinian area quite well. And I think that I've enjoyed, and they've introduced me to a larger group of archaeologists who are really, have spent their whole times in that field. So you might want to investigate that group.
I've been to one presentation, but honestly, I'm really interested in learning more, and so I appreciate that, that lead.
Right, and they have a yearly archaeology weekend where they look at a topic, and from that you can make quite a number of contacts. The other piece of information you might be interested in is some books written by a lady by the name of Nelson. I don't know what her first name was. Might have been Ethel Nelson, I'm not quite sure, is that right? And she describes, if you're looking for the origin of civilizations, the Chinese writings might go back even further than the Akkadian and the Sumerian writings. I think everyone would date the Sumerian things about 2500 to 3000 BC. The Egyptians are probably around 2500. The Chinese maybe go back a little past 3000.
Yeah. That's a very good point. And in my list of civilizations, as they evolved and became civilizations,
Right.
you have the Sumerians, I have the Chinese,
Yes.
and at the same time, just actually the Hindus, the Aryan Hindus. But right behind that is the Egyptians. So basically, for functional purposes, you could put them all on the same line. But they started to eat better foods and become civilized and urbanized and build structures and bury their dead and those kind of stuff before 5000 BC. But only 2 or 3 of them accelerated through the 4th millennium and then the 3rd millennium. So the Sumerian were writing at about 4300 BC, and the oldest record, which is a Semitic Akkadian record that's been found, is about 3750 BC, which happens to be about the same time as the Nippurian calendar was invented. So yes, I'm not saying that you're wrong on that. I think the key point here is the Chinese were very early players in building civilization, and we've got a lot to learn from the Chinese, because in terms of the physical evidence of what is left behind, who were the gods that visited, their stories, their folklore, their legends, whatever you want to call it, are very, very interesting and not dissimilar to Mesopotamia.
Well, I think you might find them different. Nelson, I think, at least for me, there's not that much written about it. I've tried to look for it.
No,
Nelson
not a lot.
and her group probably do as much as anyone, and it might.
I appreciate that. I'll definitely make a note of that, and I'll definitely take a look at it.
That's back there.
While they're doing that, let me just hold up a couple of books that were very useful. The Bible Unearthed, which is a fairly recent book updating a lot of archaeology. Earth Chronicles, who were the players on the stage. Zechariah Sitchin, Logic, the Reason for God in an Age of Skepticism. And this was kind of a really fundamental book here, The History of God, by Karen Armstrong, who's well recognized author. This was a very good foundational book to read. And then in terms of an atlas in the civilizations, just a secular book here, this one by Hayward, that has beautiful maps and drawings in it with a summary of each civilization, and also what the key cities were and what their gods were. So I just brought a handful of stuff just to make sure I'm trying to read widely, but go ahead.
I was just curious if you could kind of flesh out what the intelligent design that you've kind of settled on, what exactly that looks like. If that's God kind of starting the evolutionary process, or how that...
Well, as I said, this is a personal journey, and this is where I am at the moment. I reserve the right to change next week and the week thereafter. But what my belief is that there were gods on Earth. They had a supercharged DNA. There's no way that the primordial atoms, all the way through that 10 generations of primordial leaders, that lived to be up to 1,000 years had our DNA. I mean, we can't get our DNA there. They were of a different germ. And but to answer your question, where I believe I think there was associates, there was a team of gods that were on earth. The Bible talks about let us go down and put a different word in their mouth or speech in their mouth. Let us create man in our likeness, in our image and in our likeness. They have now after the fall, they have now become like us. Us was always there. God was not a solo practitioner here, operating by himself. He had associates. So I have to ask who those associates. Mesopotamian literature would tell me that there were 3 primary gods. There were the sons of gods that slept and married the daughters of men and had children that were demigods. You see, this is part of that supercharged DNA. This explains somewhat why over time the length of humans was decreasing because that DNA was getting diluted. Noah wasn't chosen because he was the last good man standing. He had the best DNA to launch civilization again. So I'm seeing a Godhead, probably a trinity of senior gods and junior gods, and I'm prepared at this stage to think that Earth was a project, that there are many other Earths. The gods came here for a purpose. Part of that purpose was to have humans. If you read the Islamic literature, you ask why did God create humans? Because he wanted to look in a mirror. It's an interesting way to answer the question. He wanted people he could relate to, not dissimilar to the Christian position. Now, I asked my Adventist friends, why did God create humans? There's different answers, but some of them are quite narcissistic. But back to your question here, really was, I think there was a Godhead on earth. I believe that all those gods say they talk to gods in heaven. So my belief is, and they talk about, from time to time, 7 gods, like a supreme council, a supreme court. To me that explains why God hasn't killed the devil, done all the things that we would want him to do. Part of the answer is he hasn't got permission, he can't. But because we bought into monotheism, which was a Jewish concept, they pushed this story. It was hugely successful. It was a brilliant piece of writing and artistry, and not without merit in all different directions. But they were a desperate people, down to about 50,000 Judahites left. They had to do something, written in captivity, a lot of hyperbole. But their God was the God of all gods, and we buy that as Christians. So I don't necessarily I'm not buying the monotheistic thing at this point in time. I believe there are other gods in heaven. It makes sense to me. God talks a lot about church, a family, a son, a father. Hey, how about a mother? How about a brother? You know, it's so important for Christianity. The family is so central, so important. Why would we not think that was a model in heaven? You see? So, who's coming back for us? It mightn't be the one body, the body that we think was one body that lives forever in eternal life. We Adventists had it both ways. You go to heaven, go to hell, and you burn forever. Oh no, only as long as there's material to burn. Well, God has eternal life, everlasting life. Is that forever? You know, these gods did not live forever. They lived a much longer time. They didn't ask to be called gods. The people called them gods because they lived for a longer period of time and did wonderful things. But they never themselves said that they were gods, most of them. So from that point of view, I'm still with the concept, and I'm comfortable with it, that there's a Godhead on earth, reflected there in the Trinity by its different characteristics, and that they all spoke to, and some even said, even we accept in the Bible Enoch and others being translated, Elijah being translated to heaven. They went somewhere else off this earth. It's hard for us to think that our God is an extraterrestrial, but he doesn't live on earth. By definition, he's an extraterrestrial. He doesn't hold papers to any country on earth, so he's an alien. That's the first time I went. My God, is an extraterrestrial and alien? Yes, by definition he is, because he doesn't live on earth, he doesn't hold papers to a country. He's not a citizen. So I think we limit ourselves, frankly, and need to leave ourselves open to discovery that there are a family of gods in heaven, and there are other worlds. The statistical probability that Earth in this Goldilocks position is the only creation of God and the only inhabited planet on Earth is almost zero. It's almost zero. Go ahead. I hope talk to me offline if I didn't answer your question.
I appreciate your deep academia that's way up here somewhere. But two things I really affirm that what you said, your God does not make fear in you. Amen. And secondly, that our Christian hope, or the hope of civilization, is not merely a hope, it is a determined certainty. And I want to say amen. We sure need some certainty.
Thank you.
Thirdly, you quoted something that you had read that was the most beautiful writings that you had ever read, and you could make it available. Please do.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, God talking to his people in that theophany, in that journey, it should have been a beautiful thing. It shouldn't be filled with terror. Now, there's some pretty bizarre things that happen. I'm still working on it. But a lot of it, once you make it explainable, it's beautiful. Peter, here. Oh, sorry, Peter.
Thank you, Rodney, for sharing with us your search for God. I try to sum up a little bit your experience, and I remember what Louis Pasteur once said, that if we are having a little science, that will take us away from God. But if we get a lot of science, that will bring us closer to God. Then your search was a long search and extensive search, and again, it's a very interesting one. The doubt that we were talking about, that started your search, and I should say, thank God that your search led us to continue, not only to doubt at one point, but to continue your search.
Yes.
I don't know if Jesus' words inspire you when he said that search and you'll find, and knock and the door will be open to you, or was just curiosity or instinctive search for
Yes.
God.
Yes.
But anyway, it led you toward the right thing. And I was thinking, well, what about if we stop at one point in time and get stuck with doubt? What is the effect of this attitude in our lives? And I reflected a little bit on this, and of course, what this skepticism means for our life. Of course, it leads us to not to believe in God, not to believe that we are created in His image. And as one time St. Augustine so beautiful said that for you have created for your own satisfaction, for your own good, and our souls do not find rest until we rest in Thee. So beautifully said. Of course, other effects will be that we don't believe in life after death. Will be that we don't believe that is a foundation for the morality that exists in the world, for good and evil. We will not believe that there is a free will that is closely related with God. We don't believe that there is a meaning for our lives. We don't have a meaning. There is no God, there is no meaning for our life.
And millions and billions, maybe not billions, millions of people are there in that twilight zone. My point, not to cut you off there, is pursue your doubts. Chase them down. Don't let your doubt, as I say, your doubt should not incapacitate you. I see so many Adventists immobilized by their doubts. Get onto it, like you would if it's your money and you're going to invest it, or you're going to renovate your house, or whatever you're going to do. Get onto it as an individual. But two things that you mentioned there reminded me of stakes in the ground. My first stake in the ground, after I believed that there was a God I had yet to define, was we were created in His image and likeness, which means inside and out, we are like God. God was on earth, and He talked and He walked with people, you see, and He visited people. He sat down and when He visited, I think it was Abraham, before the sinning cities were wiped out. He had His feet washed. He ate. He drank with them. I mean, that is part of my imagery now. That's not I will not buy into a God who is a shape changer. You know, that's just skipping around looking for easy answers. You know, and when you realize that God created somebody that looked like him, wasn't necessarily creating a worshiper. They need workers for the Garden of Eden and to inhabit the earth. That was part of the long-term plan. But the other thing you mentioned to me that's is the end times when the Lord will come back. I'm holding it. I don't believe that's necessarily going to be Eden recreated. Eden was a mess. The devil was there from the get-go. His angels were there from the get-go. The deception happened early. And in 10 generations, long generations, God said, I hate it. I'm going to wipe them all out. I'm going to kill them all. That's not perfection. That's not a beautiful heaven. When God comes back, his promise was to reestablish a new Jerusalem. And I do believe it's going to happen literally, and it's going to be in the countries that we see all the mess now. Because it always was. That was the war that was downloaded from heaven. It's God's to fix. All the Western diplomacy in the world is not going to fix that problem. It's an ongoing problem. God's going to fix that problem, and it will be about Jerusalem and its surrounds.
Now,
I
very quickly, because you're talking about doubt, what is the opposite of doubt? And look a little bit of this, is the faith. Well, I looked at several definitions of faith, including definition in the Bible. But the definition that interested me the most, and I like it the most, was that God, that faith is a rational response to the evidence of God's self-discovery or self-revelation in history, in the Bible, and in His Son.
Part of my naivety was because I want to push everything to the right, from uncertainty to certainty. I was hoping that I would find a totally rational, logic, intellectual basis for God. I now know that I can't and I shouldn't, because it does require faith. And as I've read all the major faiths, they've gone back and forward between rationality, areas of rationality, and areas of faith. But I believe you have to have both. So I'm reconciled, you have to have those. But my main point is they have to converge to experience.
Okay, Rodney, thank you very much for sharing with us your journey. It's not always easy to set up here, I know, but we thank you for sharing your experiences with us today. And we're glad you're coming, and we're part of that journey for you.
Well, I appreciate you all. And one day maybe I'll tell you how much I've learned from you collectively, but from some of you as individuals. But I just finished by saying that I learned it a long time ago that only people can inspire people. Institutions don't inspire people. Structured organizations don't look for them for inspiration. But it's people that inspire people. And we should do much more sharing of what has God done for you lately and what have you done for God lately.
Again, I want to mention about next weekend, the Spectrum annual meeting. And I forgot to mention that there's a premiere showing of the Roy Branson documentary. And many of you were part of that. The day that we were over to Dr. Bronstetter's house, they were filming us, and they were filming us here. So remember that, and also remember next week's at 3:30, Sabbath afternoon, this Myrna Taylor's memorial service will be at the University Church Sanctuary. At this time, let's read our benediction. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.